Let's talk tariffs and how they might affect our luxury purchases. Yesterday, April 2nd, new higher tariffs were announced on foreign goods entering the United States. Many of the handbags and other luxuries that we buy are from countries outside of the United States. So in this video, let's talk about how the new tariffs might affect our handbag purchases and other luxury purchases going forward. Both luxury and contemporary brands from both foreign and domestic companies. And of course, this being so politically related, it's a bit tricky to make a video about this because US politics are so contentious because people have very strong feelings one way or the other. However, my intention with this video is to be as objective as possible and talk about facts and policies rather than who might be right or wrong about this. We will discuss what are tariffs, how are they paid, who gets the money, and what is it used for? How these new tariffs would affect prices for American consumers, especially geared toward handbags and luxury goods, possible reactions to the tariffs from both consumers and fashion houses, and what is the intended purpose of the tariffs anyway? We have a lot to talk about, so stay tuned. And welcome, I'm Autumn Beckman, and I'm here to help you live your most luxurious life within your budget. I post new videos on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays, so please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss any of those. And so you don't miss my daily community posts where I share the best sales of the day and fabulous handbags that I find. Also, don't miss my website, autumnbeckman.com. The shop page is where you'll find handbags and accessories that I have for sale, as well as the My Handbag Collection Organizer, which is a set of planner pages that I've designed to help you organize and curate your handbags and your life. The heart of which is the item tracker page where you can record all the information you'd ever want to know about your handbags and small goods. I also have wish list pages, purchase trackers, pages to record the information of your sales associates, pages to track different ways you use your items, as well as calendar pages in a variety of formats so you can choose what works best for you, project planning pages, several different habit trackers, and so much more. Because this is such a political topic, and by the way, everything is political, everything is connected to politics and policies in some way. But since this is a new topic that there's been a lot of argument about, and since conversations about US politics on social media tend to be quite argumentative and can get nasty pretty quickly, I want to set one ground rule here. In this video, I am not going to mention any particular politicians. My goal here is to talk about the policy itself, not to talk about particular people, not to talk about left versus right, just the policy. And I would appreciate if in the comments section you could do the same. I would appreciate if you would keep names, like politicians' names, out of the conversations. If you would keep words like left and right when you're referring to political groups or Republican, Democrat, or anything like that, making generalizations about other groups, blaming people, anything negative like that, I would like to be left out of the comment section. And as always, I have my comment section set up so that comments don't go live until I approve them first. I'm not trying to stifle your free speech here, but what I am trying to do is always, not just in this video, keeping my comment section respectful and factual, not spreading misinformation or lies. And I definitely came across some of that while researching for this video. I will also say that I am not a politician, nor am I an economist, so I did have to do some research to answer some of the questions I had about what's going on with these tariffs. I read articles from a variety of sources, and I have linked all of those in the description box below so you can check them out. And from those articles, I have pulled facts and information, not people's opinions. And several of those articles do include opinions. Now that that's out of the way, let's jump in. What are tariffs? According to the AP article that's linked below, tariffs are taxes on imports. They're collected when foreign goods cross the US border, and it's the Customs and Border Protection that collects that money. The money then goes to the US Treasury to help pay the federal government's expenses. And according to law, it's Congress, no one else, who has the authority to say how that money is to be spent. The new tax policy that was signed yesterday says that there's now a 10% base tariff on all imported goods from outside the United States. This excludes Mexico and Canada because there are already some trade deals being worked out there. The current information I saw on that says that it's 25% tariffs for each of those countries, but last I heard that was still in flux. I'm not 100% sure on that. I will also note I thought this was funny. The 10% base rate even applies to the remote Heard and McDonald's Islands of Australia, which you can see here are very small and very far away from anything else. And they are primarily populated by penguins. There are no humans on these islands. So what I would like to know, I would like some government transparency here. What does our government know about the penguins that they haven't told us yet? Now, even though we have that base 10% tariff on all countries other than Canada and Mexico, many of the tariffs are quite a bit higher than that. Goods from China will have a 34% tariff, and that's on top of 20% from items that come from Beijing. There'll be a 20% tariff on anything from the European Union, 24% on Japan. I have seen some people on social media saying that that number for Japan is only for automotive related goods, but I'm not sure that that is correct. This stuff gets very complicated. I'm really trying to boil it down in this video. 26% tariffs on India. So what does this mean? Historically, when a company has tariffs imposed on them, on their country, that company tends to pass along the cost of the tariff to the consumer. So like I said a second ago, that tariff money collected when goods enter the US goes to the treasury, then is spent for government expenses. So the government is who gets the tariff money. However, the tariff prices that are being paid by companies in other countries, they're passing that cost of business onto us, like they do with every other cost of business. So our government will benefit from tariffs, but we will not, at least in terms of the financial part. One thing that I'm still not clear on, because I don't have a background in import and export and tariffs and all that, so maybe some of you do and you can help me answer this question. Let's say you have an item that's manufactured in China where there's a 34% tariff, but that item is then shipped to France for some reason, and then it's shipped from France to the United States, and France has a 20% tariff because it's part of the European Union. So which tariff amount does the US impose? Do they do the 34% amount from China where it's manufactured, or the 20% from France where it's shipped? That I don't know. If you do, please let us know in the comment section below. Now let's look at how these tariffs could affect the prices of some of the goods that we buy, the handbags and accessories. France, Italy, and Spain are all part of the European Union. And as we know, those are some of our top made-in places that our luxury brand items come from. That means all those items would be subject to the 20% tariff that's been imposed on the European Union. If those luxury houses pass 100% of the cost of that tariff onto consumers by raising prices, here's what will happen to some of our favorite bags. Currently, the Louis Vuitton Neverfull in the size in coated canvas retails in the United States for $2,030. First of all, I had not looked at the price of the Neverfull for a while. I had no idea it was that expensive. I thought it was still like $1,400. I was shocked when I saw that. When did that happen? So if LV raises that price by 20%, then the new price for the American consumer would be $2,436 for a Neverfull in canvas. The Chanel Classic Flap, which is currently $10,800, I didn't know about that, that's crazy, would go up to $12,960. The Hermes Birkin 30 in Togo leather, which is currently $12,500, that's considered an entry-level Birkin, would go up to $15,000. But realistically here, we are on a channel about luxury living on a budget, so how many of us are going to spend that much on a Chanel Classic Flap or an Hermes Birkin anyway? Those might be dream bags, but the prices are so unrealistic for so many of us. So what about looking at a few things that are more realistic? The Louis Vuitton Clay is currently $330. That would go up to $396. The Louis Vuitton Mini Pochette, currently $760, would go up to $912. The Louis Vuitton Pochette Accessoire, currently $1,550 because they redesigned it and hiked up the price, would go to $1,860, $1,860. A Chanel little zipped O-coin pouch thing, not the bigger ones, just the ones that are closer in size to the Louis Vuitton Clay. They're currently $925. They would go to $1,110. A 90 centimeter Hermes silk scarf, currently $590, would jump to $708. And an Hermes silk twilly, currently $240, would jump to $288. And of course, this would not just affect luxury brands, nor would it just affect foreign companies. Let's take a look at Coach. What would this do for Coach, for example, an American company that manufactures bags overseas? Coach makes bags in the Philippines, which now has a 17% tariff, China, which has a 34%, Vietnam, which has 46% tariff, and Cambodia, which now has a 49% tariff. What would that do to a bag that currently costs $300 from Coach? Well, if it was made in the Philippines or shipped from the Philippines, however this works, that would take the price up to $351. From China, it would go to $402. Vietnam, a $300 bag would jump to $438. Cambodia, it would be $447. And if it was in Beijing, if I'm doing the math correctly on this one, you have the 34% China tariff plus another 20% from Beijing. So if you add those two percentages together, that would take a bag from $300 to $462. Another American company that manufactures overseas is Dooney & Bourke. They manufacture in places like Italy and Vietnam. Portland Leather, they're a little bit different because they're not overseas so much, but they are outside of the US in terms of their manufacturing. A couple years ago, they moved manufacturing from the United States to Mexico. If we take that current number of a 25% tariff, that means a $100 bag is now $125. A $200 bag becomes $250. But I'm not entirely sure how that would work with Mexico right now, or with an American company manufacturing in Mexico. It remains to be seen. I have seen people talking about there being nuances to all this, such as different categories of products have different amounts of tariffs. However, I saw something today when I was doing this research that said with this new tariff policy from yesterday that that's not necessarily the case, that it might be a flat number, but I don't know. I think a lot of people don't know yet. And Japan is one of those places. Like I mentioned before, there's a 24% tariff now in Japan, but I've seen some people say that's only for automotive goods. Is it though? Let's say it's not. Let's say it's on all goods. A lot of us in the handbag community, for the past several years, this has been a growing trend, is to go to marketplaces like eBay and purchase pre-loved goods from overseas sellers in Japan, because they have a huge inventory of pre-loved bags and they can generally be trusted to have good prices and to be authentic. So one of the first questions I had, and I've seen other people in like handbag Facebook groups asking this today too, is if I buy something on a platform like eBay from a seller in Japan, am I going to be charged a 24% tariff on that? And the answer seems to be, we don't know yet. My guess would be that there are ways around that, especially since you're dealing with individuals there and not sending merchandise in bulk. For example, not being a company that's sending a shipping container full of products to the States. And one thing I kept seeing mentioned was a few people were talking about there was an exemption for anything priced $800 or less. So I looked that up. It's still a little confusing. The exemption that I found, and I will link an article about this below, is aimed at China. So I don't know if that also applies to other countries. But what this is there was some kind of loophole that allowed inexpensive goods from China to be shipped to the States in order to avoid tariffs. So places like Shein and Temu have utilized this to be able to keep costs to US customers very low. And I know a lot of you shop with those two companies. So part of what happened yesterday with the signing of all these new tariff policies is that loophole was closed. So now the policy is shipments under $800 that are sent through the International Postal Network will be subject to a duty rate of either 30% of their value or $25 per item. And that number will increase on June 1st to $50 per item. And I don't know if this is automatic or if it's like custom fees have been, where sometimes you're charged and sometimes you're not, and you never know when that's going to happen. That part is unclear. And again, not sure if that's only for goods from China or if it's a blanket policy for all countries. So that's how we can expect those new tariffs might affect prices that we end up paying. But what about reactions to this? What actions will consumers take to this? What actions will companies take to this? The most obvious reaction, I think, is that consumers aren't going to buy as much. Because in this video, of course, we are primarily focused on handbags and small goods and luxury products. However, these tariffs are affecting goods across every category, every industry. So we won't just see prices of handbags and accessories and luxury goods rise. We'll also see prices rise on things like groceries. Vehicles, there's like a 25% tariff put in starting today on foreign vehicles. Office supplies, clothing. Where do your clothes come from? Where does your food come from? Anything coming from outside of the United States, prices are going up. And over the past few years, we've already seen Americans reining in our spending, and that is going to continue. And I've seen people predicting, they've been doing this for years to be fair, but people have been predicting a recession that would be expedited due to these tariffs. So consumers are likely to spend less because we're stretched more and more thin with other purchases that are necessities and not fun, frivolous things like luxury goods. What are the luxury fashion houses going to do? There are a few things that they could do. First, I want to give you a little context of what's been going on, because what's about to happen, whatever it is, doesn't exist in a vacuum. There have been things going on globally and of course within the fashion industry that are affecting several things we're talking about here. 2020, the whole world was hit with a pandemic, and we have had global effects of that ever since then. We're still feeling it today, 5 years later. We've had massive job loss with companies closing, companies doing layoffs, all kinds of things happening. And we've seen a lot more of that lately with tens of thousands of federal workers being laid off. So income is low. The job market is also incredibly difficult. And you may remember in those first few years of COVID, there were many videos in the luxury YouTube space here about how these fashion houses were continuing to raise prices, even though so many people globally were suffering financially. And not only that, but many of the companies or some of the products from these companies, we were seeing declines in quality. At the same time, we're seeing prices go up. So let's review a couple of numbers from what's happened with some luxury prices between 2020 and now. In 2020, the Louis Vuitton Speedy 30 in canvas was $1,100. Today, it's $1,550. That's a $450 difference and an increase of 41%. The Louis Vuitton Neverfull MM in canvas in 2020 was $1,500. Like I told you today, it's $2,030. It's a $500 difference or a 35% price increase. The Chanel Classic Flap in 2020 was $6,500. Remember the good old days? Today it's $10,800. That's a $4,300 difference or an increase in price of 66%. In 5 years. The Hermes Birkin 30 in Togo in 2020 was $11,000. Today it's only $12,500. That's really not much of a difference. So Hermes is actually, at least with that bag, doing pretty well with their price increases. They're more respectful to us than the other companies. That's a $1,500 difference or a 14% increase over 5 years. That seems reasonable. The others not so much. And keep in mind that despite what these luxury brands might have us believe through their marketing, the majority of their clientele, for many, maybe not all of these companies, are the aspirational clients. These are the middle class consumers. And the American middle class is suffering. We have been for a while. And I would encourage Americans, because we have a tendency to forget this, that we are not the only country in the world and that other people are also going through the same things. Other economies are bad. Other people are in hardship just like we are. However, relatively speaking, the US, although it hasn't felt that way for many of us, the US, if you look at the numbers, our economy actually has been pretty robust compared to the rest of the world. But these tariffs are going to make it worse for consumers. And the luxury fashion houses are aware of this, and they're going to be in a bit of a dilemma here. Because on one hand, they have kept raising prices ridiculous amounts over the last 5 years when people have been suffering. And now they have another huge price increase to deal with. They have a decision to make. Do they pass that on to the consumer and raise prices even more and risk damaging relationships between consumers and their companies even further than they have lately? Or do they eat those costs? Because they're already making exorbitant profits. Even though they've seen losses lately, it'll be curious to see what companies choose to do about these tariffs. Will they impose 100% of it on us? Will they impose only part? Will they eat it and keep prices relatively stable because they fear even further losses? One of the articles I read specifically about this topic, it's a very interesting one. It talks about the tariffs specifically with luxury brands. It said that some of these companies were seeing the American market having a boost over the China market in terms of spending, and that they were expecting that and counting on the American market to bring in revenue for them in 2025. But that was before these tariffs were announced. So how is that going to affect their businesses if we aren't buying as much? In that article, Hermes executive chairman Axel Dumas says that if duties increase, meaning tariffs, it's all kind of the same thing. He says if duties increase, we'll increase prices accordingly. So it sounds like Hermes will pass 100% of the cost of tariffs onto consumers. And Kering CEO François-Henri Pinault signaled the same, and Kering owns Gucci, Balenciaga, YSL, and others. Another thing the fashion houses might do is shift some manufacturing to countries with lower tariffs. Louis Vuitton, I will say, has an advantage here because Louis Vuitton already has manufacturing plants in California and in Texas. So they could just build up manufacturing here and avoid those tariffs on importing their goods from the European Union. However, my understanding, I did a video on the Texas plant a few years ago, I'll link that below too, as well as a video I did called Louis Vuitton is Not for Poor People about who their customer base really is. So those two will be linked below if you want to check them out. And I'll link one on the fallacy of the made-in stamps. Are they actually made where they say they're made? And when you think of something being made somewhere, you think of certain people making them. Are those people actually making them, or is it someone else? I'll link those 3 videos below. But even if Louis Vuitton expanded their manufacturing in the States, it's my understanding, based on my research for that Texas plant video, that they still import their materials. And those materials would still be subject to the tariffs. Also, the other European-based luxury bag companies, they could do the same thing. They could open plants in the States, manufacture here. However, then like Louis Vuitton, they have to put a Made in USA stamp. And I think a lot of them probably wouldn't want to do that. I think if you're a company out of France and your whole heritage is about being French, you probably want your Made in stamp to say Made in France, right? Not anywhere else. And this question I had earlier about if an item is manufactured somewhere and then shipped somewhere else and then shipped to the US. If the tariff is based on where it's shipped from, not where it's made, then companies could make something somewhere where it's cheap, ship to a country with a low tariff rate, and then ship to the US. However, that of course would cost the company more money if that's something they weren't already doing because they'd have all those extra shipping costs. Plus whatever tariffs might be in place between those two companies. Plus there would be the extra time it takes to ship between those two companies. And time is money. And then what would happen in terms of shipping times? Let's say Louis Vuitton is doing a drop, like they just did the Murakami drop worldwide. And there is a particular release date that is also worldwide. Would they be able to get the goods to the US at the same time as they get them to the rest of the world? If you place an order with a company and the item you're ordering is shipping from overseas, how might that affect shipping times? How might that affect what you have to pay for the item? Another idea that I had yesterday, and I saw people talking about this today, will it be more cost effective if you're somebody, and this isn't for like somebody like me who doesn't have a ton of money to do this, but for some people who maybe buy a lot of expensive luxury bags throughout the year. Might it be cost effective for them to not buy them in the US, but to go to Europe and buy them there? Could the difference in price, especially if when you get there you're buying multiple things, could the difference in the amount from the tariffs, especially considering that European prices would be lower for those items anyway, plus you get the VAT refund, would it end up being cheaper, or maybe just as much, to buy your bags over there, and for what you've saved in doing that, maybe that would cancel out the cost of your trip. So you'd spend maybe the same amount of money but get a free trip to Europe. That would be nice. But wouldn't that be interesting if it worked out that way? And it would not surprise me at all to start seeing people doing that. But of course, it remains to be seen what will actually happen and how people and companies will actually react, and if these tariffs will even go into place, because the ones that were talked about for Canada and Mexico not too long ago, if I remember correctly, we backed out of those at the last minute. I'm not sure what's going on there right now, but perhaps we'll see some of the same things happening with the new tariffs. And these are supposed to be reciprocal tariffs, that's what they're called. But what that means is, let's say somebody's charging you $5. Reciprocal would mean you now also charge them $5, so it's reciprocal. But that's not what's going on based on the numbers and based on what I've seen across several articles. The tariff amounts that were put out yesterday, for the most part, are far, far, far above the tariffs that the US is paying to export goods to other countries. So that's something to be aware of. So what is the point of these tariffs at all, given everything we just talked about? I've heard there are a few ideas behind it. I've heard the goal, ultimately, with all of this is to encourage Americans to buy American products instead of products from other countries. Well, of course, with things like luxury handbags that are from companies in Europe, we have no other options. There are American handbag companies you can buy from for sure, but if you want an Hermes bag, you have to buy it from Hermes, right? Unless you want to pay a lot more for a Preloved bag. If you want a Chanel classic flap, you have to get that from Chanel. So there aren't necessarily other options for Americans for the products that we're talking about. Plus, we know that American products, I mean, when we're talking about luxury bags, not necessarily, but in general, American products tend to cost more than products from other countries. And I've heard it said that Americans will be willing to pay more for things made in America in order to boost our economy. However, having the option to pay more for American goods is not new. That's been around for a long time, and Americans have spoken, and we generally tend to prefer to pay less no matter where it comes from. That's why places like Temu and Shein and Walmart and Amazon are so successful. Low prices. And for a lot of people, quality doesn't even matter that much. Again, we're not talking about handbags for right now, but a lot of products in general, lower price is even more important than quality. I've also heard that one of the reasons behind these tariffs is to bring manufacturing back to the US. So we talked about that a little bit, like with Louis Vuitton, potentially increasing manufacturing here. But like we discussed, some companies in the handbag space are not going to want to do that. Plus, American manufacturing, as I understand it, tends to cost more to the business, and those costs, of course, are passed along to the consumer. Plus, are those the kinds of jobs that Americans want and are willing to do? And would the pay for those jobs be enough that Americans are willing to accept it? And then would the cost that has to be charged for the products still be low enough that Americans are willing to buy those products over similar products from other countries that are cheaper? It remains to be seen. I've also heard that these tariff numbers from yesterday are very high because they're supposed to be starting points for negotiation, and that they will end up going down as more reasonable tariffs are negotiated with other countries. And that's certainly possible. However, when something like this, something so drastic as the numbers we saw on these tariffs are announced, pretty much the whole world goes into a bit of a panic. Businesses, consumers, and things like the stock market. We've seen the stock market tumble a bit. Even if you're not someone who buys and sells stocks and keeps up with the stock market, so many of us have our retirement money tied up in stocks. And I feel like it's not right for people at the top who don't have to worry about money to be playing around with literally the livelihoods of those of us who do. That just doesn't seem right to me. But again, it remains to be seen what will actually happen, what the fallout will be, what the consequences will be. So time will tell. Let me know what you think of all this, please, without mentioning names or putting anybody down. Let me know what you think of the policy and the possible reactions in the comments section below. And while you're down there, remember to check out the articles that I linked, as well as the videos that I mentioned, and check out my website where I have handbags, accessories, and planner pages. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Hope to see you back here next time, and I hope you have a fantastic day. Bye.